My name is Camila. I was a fresh college graduate, my life brimming with possibilities and dreams, when a single phone call snuffed out my joy like a gust of wind extinguishing a candle. It was a call that brought the news of my parents' tragic death in a car accident. The two people who had been my pillars of strength, my guiding lights, were suddenly gone. The shock of it was like a punch to the gut. I was a grown woman, yes, but I was just starting to navigate the adult world. My parents had been my safety net, my guides. Their sudden absence left me feeling like a ship adrift in a stormy sea. My father, with his hearty laughter and endless wisdom, was my hero. He was a man of strength and kindness, always ready with a word of advice or a comforting hug. I remember our long walks in the park, our deep conversations about everything from philosophy to the latest football game. He was my rock, my safe harbor in the stormy sea of life. My mother, with her gentle nature and unwavering support, was my best friend. She was the one who held my hand during scary movies, who stayed up late helping me with school projects, who was always there with a comforting word and a warm hug. Her love was a constant, soothing presence in my life. Their absence left a gaping hole in my life, a void that seemed impossible to fill. The house felt too quiet, too empty without their laughter and love filling it. Every corner was a reminder of them, every object a memory. In the midst of my grief, a man named Richard appeared. He was a worker at a trading company who happened to be at the scene of the accident. He had provided a witness statement, and he felt compelled to reach out to me, to offer his support. "Camila," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "I can't express how sorry I am for your loss. I saw what happened. It's not fair, and it's not right. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." His words, though simple, were a lifeline in the storm of my grief. Richard became a steady presence in my life, helping me navigate the legalities of the accident, the insurance claims, the mountain of paperwork that seemed to multiply every day. His support was invaluable, his kindness a balm for my aching heart. As the weeks turned into months, Richard and I grew closer. Our conversations grew longer, our silences more comfortable. One day, he took a deep breath, looked me in the eye, and said, "Camila, I've come to care about you a lot. More than I've cared about anyone else. Would you consider marrying me?" I was taken aback, but I looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity there. I thought about the comfort he had provided, the strength he had shown. And I said yes. I said yes to a new beginning, yes to a new chapter in my life. The wedding was a blur of joy and laughter, a day filled with hope and promise. After the celebrations, Richard and I moved into his house that was as grand as it was cold. The house was a testament to Richard's success, a symbol of the wealth he had amassed in his trading business. I was awestruck by its grandeur, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that crept over me each time I stepped into its marble halls. Soon after the move, I discovered I was pregnant. The news filled me with a sense of joy and anticipation. I dreamed of our child, of the life we would provide for him. Richard seemed pleased as well, but there was a hardness in his eyes that I couldn't quite understand. Our son, Max, was born on a clear winter morning. He was a beautiful baby, with Richard's dark hair and my bright blue eyes. Holding him in my arms, I felt a love so profound, so overwhelming, it took my breath away. Richard, too, seemed smitten with our son. But as the weeks turned into months, I noticed a change in him. One day, Richard came home late from work, his face set in a grim line. "Camila," he said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, "we need to talk about our expenses." I was taken aback. "What about them?" I asked, feeling a knot of worry form in my stomach. He threw a stack of bills on the table, his expression stern. "They've gone up, Camila," he said, his voice cold. "Ever since Max was born, we're spending much more than we used to." I felt my heart sink. "But Richard," I said, We have a baby now. Babies need things. He shot me a hard look. That's not the point, Camila, he said. You're spending too much. On things we don't need. I was stunned. I'm spending on our son, Richard, I said, my voice rising in defense. On his needs. His face hardened. I'm the one who's earning, Camila, he said, his voice harsh. I'm the one who's supporting this family. You should be more grateful. His words hit me like a punch in the gut. I felt a mixture of anger and hurt well up inside me. I had thought Richard was my partner, my ally. But his words made it clear that he saw me as a liability, an additional expense that he had to bear. The days following our heated exchange were filled with tension. Richard became more stringent about our budget, scrutinizing every receipt, every purchase. He was relentless in his accusations of my alleged overspending, despite my best efforts to economize. Camila, he'd say, his voice dripping with condescension, you need to understand the value of money. Richard, we need food, I'd say. And Max needs diapers. We can't just stop buying them. He'd look at me, his eyes hard and cold. Then figure it out, Camila. Make do with less. I'd bite my tongue, holding back the retort that was on the tip of it. It wasn't that I didn't understand the value of money, it was that Richard seemed to value it more than he did his own family. Food shopping became a game of strategy. I'd scour the aisles for the cheapest products, calculate the cost per meal, per person. I'd choose the store brands over the name brands, the bruised apples over the pristine ones. I'd walk miles to the store and back, foregoing the cost of public transport to save a few dollars. Richard's decree extended to clothing as well. No new clothes, he'd said, his voice firm, unyielding. Make do with what you have. I looked at my worn-out wardrobe, the frayed edges of my dresses, the faded colors of my shirts. I felt a pang of sadness. I wasn't asking for designer clothes or expensive jewelry. Just something new, something that hadn't been worn to threads. One day, I saw a beautiful little jumper for Max in a store window. It was on sale, but even then, it was more than I could afford. I walked away, my heart heavy. When I got home, Richard was there. You were at the store, weren't you? Buying more stuff we don't need. I didn't buy anything, Richard, I said, my voice steady. I can't. You've made sure of that. He scoffed. Don't play the victim, Camila. You're the one who can't control her spending. I looked at him, my heart pounding. I'm trying to provide for our son, Richard. Can't you see that? He got up, his face red. I'm the one providing for this family, Camila. You're just spending my money. I felt a surge of anger. Your money? Richard, we're a family. It's our money. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Oh, Camila. You're so naive. I stood my ground, my hands clenched. No, Richard. I'm not naive. I'm just trying to do what's best for our son. He glared at me. And I'm trying to save us from bankruptcy. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, my heart aching. All the while, I noticed Richard's lifestyle remained unchanged. He still wore his designer suits, still splurged on expensive gadgets. He'd come home with a new phone, a new laptop, a new watch, while I was left to mend old clothes and ration our meals. Richard, I'd say, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice, how come you get to buy new things, but I can't? He'd look at me, a smug smile on his face. Because I earn the money, Camila. I get to decide how it's spent. His words stung, a slap in the face. I was his wife, the mother of his child, but he treated me like a burden, like an unwanted expense. His greed was clear, his arrogance palpable. He valued his gadgets more than he valued us. It was a Tuesday when Max came down with a fever. His little body was hot to the touch, his eyes were red from crying. I knew I had to get him medicine, and quick. I rummaged through the cupboards, my heart sinking when I saw them bare. We were out of money, out of options. I did the only thing I could. I took the last of our cash, the money I'd been saving for Richard's favorite steak, and bought medicine for Max. I knew Richard would be mad, knew he'd be furious. But Max was more important. He was my son, my baby. I couldn't let him suffer. When Richard came home that night, he was in a foul mood. He'd had a long day at work, he said, and all he wanted was a good meal. When he saw the empty table, his face turned red. "Camila," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "where's my dinner?" I swallowed hard. "Max was sick," I said. "I used the money to buy him medicine." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You what?" "I bought medicine for Max," I repeated, my voice steady, despite the fear in my heart. Richard slammed his fist on the table. "You spent my money on medicine for that brat?" I flinched at his words. "Max is our son, Richard. He was sick." Richard scoffed. "He's always sick. Always needing something. Just like you." I felt a surge of anger. "We're your family, Richard. We're not freeloaders." Richard stood up, his face contorted with rage. "You're nothing but a burden, Camila. You and that kid. All you do is take. I stood my ground. "We're your responsibility, Richard. You can't just abandon us." Richard laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "Watch me." And with that, he grabbed my arm, yanked me to the door. "Get out," he said, his voice cold. "Take your brat and get out." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "Richard, please. He's sick. We have nowhere to go." Richard's gaze was icy. "Not my problem." He shoved us out the door, slamming it shut behind us. 5 minutes later, he threw a bag of our clothes at my feet. I stood there, holding Max in my arms, the cold seeping into my bones. I looked at the house, our house, now a fortress we were barred from. That was the final straw. I knew then that I couldn't stay with Richard, couldn't subject Max to his cruelty. We deserved better, deserved a life free of his anger, his greed. So, I walked away, Max clutched in my arms, our future uncertain. But I knew one thing for sure. I would fight for us, fight for a better life. Richard had pushed us away, but he couldn't break us. We were stronger than he thought, stronger than he'd ever know. The city was vast and overwhelming, a concrete jungle where I knew no one. My son, Max, was just a toddler, too young to understand the dire situation we were in. With no money, no friends, and no home, I felt like a ship adrift in a stormy sea. That's when I remembered Grandma. My father's mother, a woman I had seen only once in my life, came to mind. Dad had a strained relationship with her and they had lost contact many years ago. I barely remembered her face, but I remembered the house she lived in, a large, old structure nestled in a quiet town far from the city's bustle. I had no choice but to take a leap of faith. With the last of my money, found in the pocket of my old jacket, I bought 2 intercity bus tickets. Max and I boarded the bus, our future uncertain but our resolve firm. The journey was long, and Max, feeling unwell, whimpered in my arms. I held him close, whispering soothing words, promising a better future. We arrived at Grandma's town as the sun was setting. The large, old house stood just as I remembered, a beacon of hope amidst our turmoil. Gathering my courage, I walked up to the door and knocked. The door creaked open, and there stood Grandma. She was older than I remembered, her face stern and her eyes sharp. She looked at me, a hint of confusion in her eyes. Yes? She asked, her voice firm. I swallowed my fear and introduced myself. Grandma, it's me, Camila. I'm your son's daughter. She squinted at me, studying my face. After a moment, recognition dawned on her. You have your father's eyes, she said, her voice softer. She opened the door wider, inviting us in. We stepped into the house, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold outside. I told Grandma everything about Richard, about Max's illness, about our eviction. I poured out my fears and worries, the burdens I had been carrying alone for so long. Grandma listened, her face hardening as I mentioned Richard. That scoundrel. She spat, her eyes flashing with anger. He'll get what he deserves. In that moment, I felt a surge of relief. Here was someone who believed in me, someone who was on my side. Grandma offered us a place to stay, a place to call home. We were no longer alone, we had Grandma. That night, as Max slept soundly in a warm bed and I sat by the fire with Grandma, I felt a glimmer of hope. The journey to Grandma's was fraught with uncertainty and fear, but it led us to a safe haven. It was our first step towards a new life, a life away from Richard's shadow. The attic was a dusty, forgotten place, filled with boxes upon boxes of old stuff. Grandma hadn't been up there in years, and it showed. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and mothballs, and the floor creaked under my weight. Be careful, Camila, Grandma called from the bottom of the stairs. It's been ages since anyone's been up there. I nodded, my eyes scanning the room. As a person trained as a restorer, I could see the potential in the discarded items. There were old furniture pieces, paintings, knickknacks, all covered in a thick layer of dust. It was like stepping into a time capsule, a glimpse into the past. With Grandma's permission, I started working on the items. I cleaned, repaired, and restored them, bringing them back to life. Each piece had a story to tell, a history to uncover. It was a labor of love, a way to keep my mind off the troubles of the past. Days turned into weeks, and before I knew it, the attic was transformed. The old, discarded items were now beautiful antiques, their value increased tenfold. I took some of them to a local antique store, hoping to make a small profit. The owner, a man named Mr. Peterson, was surprised by the quality of the items. These are fantastic, Camila, he said, his eyes wide. Where did you find them? In my grandma's attic, I replied, a smile playing on my lips. She had no idea what she was sitting on. Mr. Peterson laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. Well, she's a lucky woman to have a granddaughter like you. I blushed, thanking him for his kind words. He bought all the items, giving me a hefty sum of money. I was stunned. I had hoped for a small profit, but this was beyond my wildest dreams. When I returned home, Grandma was waiting for me. How did it go? She asked, her eyes hopeful. I showed her the money, her eyes widening in surprise. Oh my, Camila, she said, her voice shaky. I can't believe it. I shrugged, trying to hide my excitement. It's all thanks to you, Grandma. These are your treasures, after all. We celebrated that night, a small victory in our battle for a better life. The attic treasures were more than just old items. They were a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of hope. From then on, I continued to restore the items in the attic. Each piece brought us closer to our goal, each sale a step towards our new life. The attic treasures were our lifeline, our saving grace. And we were grateful for them, for the hope they brought us, for the future they promised. Richard, that good-for-nothing, hadn't bothered to check on us. Not even a call to ask about his son. I guess he was too busy with his new life, too busy to care about the family he left behind. But we weren't going to let him off the hook that easily. Grandma had a friend, a lawyer named Stan. He was a tough old bird, sharp as a tack, and he didn't take any nonsense. We'll get that bastard, he promised, his eyes hard. He won't get away with this. With Stan's help, we filed a claim for child support. Richard was furious when he found out. He called me, his voice a venomous hiss. "You'll regret this, Camila," he threatened. "You don't know what you're getting into." But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. "Bring it on, Richard," I shot back. "We'll see who regrets it in the end." The day of the court hearing arrived. Richard strutted in, all puffed up like a peacock, his lawyer by his side. He sneered at me, his eyes cold and hard. But I didn't flinch. I was ready for him. Stan presented our case, his voice steady and firm. He talked about Max, about how Richard had abandoned us, about how he hadn't paid a dime for his son's upkeep. The judge listened, his face impassive. Then it was Richard's turn. His lawyer was smooth, his words slick. He painted Richard as the victim, as a man wronged by his vindictive ex-wife. But we had a trump card. I played a recording of Richard's tirade the night he kicked us out. He didn't know about it, and I decided to surprise him. His threats, his cruel words, all for the court to hear. The room fell silent as his voice filled the air, his true nature exposed for all to see. Richard's face turned pale, his confident facade crumbling. The judge frowned, his eyes hard. "This court will not tolerate such behavior," he said, his voice stern. "Mr. Jackson, you will pay child support as required by law. You also have to pay for the emotional abuse of your ex-wife and son." Richard was stunned. He looked at me, his eyes full of disbelief. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The look on his face was victory enough. After the court hearing, Richard tried to worm his way back into our lives. He called me, his voice all sweet and smooth, like honey dripping from a spoon. "Camila," he said, "let's start over. For Max's sake." I laughed, a bitter, cynical laugh. "Start over? With you?" I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No, Richard. We're done." I could hear the surprise in his voice. "But Camila," he stammered, "you need me. You can't survive without my money." That's where he was wrong. I had a job now, a good job. I was a restorer, working for a local antique store and a museum. I was making good money, enough to support Max and me. And with Grandma's help, we were doing just fine. "I don't need you, Richard," I said, my voice steady. "I've got a job. A good job. And Max and I are doing just fine." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Richard laughed, a harsh, bitter laugh. "You? Working? I don't believe it." "Well, you better start believing it," I shot back. "Because it's true. And guess what, Richard? I'm not just surviving. I'm thriving." There was more silence. Then Richard hung up, his parting words a venomous hiss. "You'll regret this, Camila. You'll see." But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I had found my strength, my independence. And there was no going back. The next few months were a whirlwind. I was busy with work, with Max, with life. But I was happy. Truly, genuinely happy. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from Richard, free from fear, free from uncertainty. Grandma was proud of me. "You did good, kid," she said one day, her eyes twinkling. "You stood up for yourself. You took control of your life." I smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "Thanks, Grandma," I said. "I couldn't have done it without you." And that was the truth. Grandma had been my rock, my support. She had stood by me, had helped me find my strength. And for that, I was grateful. The sweet taste of victory was more than just a court win. It was a personal victory, a testament to my strength, my resilience. It was a reminder that I was more than just Richard's ex-wife. I was a survivor, a fighter, a mother, a restorer. And as I looked at Max, his eyes bright with laughter, his face full of joy, I knew I had made the right choice. I had chosen to fight, to stand up for myself, for my son. And I had won.
The cheery graduation music clashed with the pit in my stomach as I watched Derek chuck down yet another glass of cheap champagne. He grinned ear to ear, slurring drunken congratulations to our grandson Mason. Something was off about his jovial demeanor. As the reception wound down, I offered to take Mason home, silently dreading the drive back to Derek's house. The place still reeked of my daughter-in-law Jenna's perfume, the sickly sweet smell of fakery. Mason passed out in the back seat before we even left the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I caught Derek sauntering up behind a group of his sleazy poker buddies, their laughter carrying across the windswept lot. "Can you believe that ditz finally did me a favor and took off?" Derek's words knocked the air from my lungs. "Just think of all the insurance money I'll rake in." The guys roared with laughter, pounding Derek's back like he'd just been crowned king. My hands gripped the wheel as flashes of memories assaulted me. Jenna's trembling smile barely concealing her silent tears, the scribbled note tucked in her journal hidden in the attic. "If you're reading this, Derek has finally gone too far." In that moment, my suspicions solidified into a grotesque reality. The monster I'd watched my daughter fall for, blinded by young lust and his empty promises, had somehow won. Jenna was gone, or worse, all for Derek's greed. The engine revved as I tore out of the lot, Mason jolting awake next to me. "Wow, Grandma, what's the rush?" I steadied my shaking voice, speaking the half-truth I'd been rehearsing for weeks. "Nothing, honey. I just really need to get home." That night, after tucking Mason into the guest room, I pulled out the secret box I'd been stashing in the attic ventilator. Jenna's meager collection of belongings, all that remained of my daughter-in-law's shattered life. Her tattered journal landed in my lap with a thud, my fingers tracing the indentation where her last words were scratched in frantic desperation. "If you're reading this, Derek has finally gone too far. Keep this safe, and keep an eye on Mason." The implications choked me. How long had she suspected Derek's malice? What hell had she been enduring while we all blissfully looked the other way? Hot tears streamed down my cheeks. No more. I swiped them away, my jaw clenching in resolve. Derek's monstrous arrogance had handed me all the evidence I needed. It was time to strike. Over the next few weeks, I watched Derek with hawkish scrutiny. His exuberant spending and boisterous laughter raised eyebrows all over town. New Italian suits, a sports car in cherry red, reservations at the ritziest steakhouses. Living it up since the deadweight ditched him, his vile friends would snicker over bourbon and cigars. I clenched my fists until my nails dug crescents into my palms. How dare he satirize Jenna's disappearance so brazenly? My sweet, gentle daughter-in-law who showered loves on Mason and showered me with hugs even after Derek's affair. Her words from our last lunch echoed in my mind. "I think he's up to something, Mom. I've found things, but I'm afraid if I pry, he'll lash out." I shuddered, realizing her disappearance may have saved her life. But from what exactly? I needed answers. My first stop was the bank, requesting statements for all of Derek's accounts, a ploy I spun as concerning for his sudden affluent spending. The documents told a story of deception, maxed credit, compounding gambling debts owed to some terrifying names, and a 7-figure life insurance payout scheduled just weeks after Jenna's disappearance. My blood boiled. That smirking, materialistic snake wasn't grieving. He was cashing in on his wife's vanishing act. I longed to confront him but fought off my rage, knowing I'd need an incredible smokescreen to take him down. Next, I turned my sights on Jenna's inner circle, starting with Tara, her closest work friend. He had money troubles, big ones, Tara confided over a hushed brunch, and Jenna suspected he was unfaithful again, though she never confided details with me. She wrung her hands, voice cracking. "I'm just so worried he, you know." "I know," I stated firmly. "Which is why we're going to find her." Tara's eyes burned with promise. "Whatever you need." With an ally and a trail of evidence, Phase 1 was complete. As satisfying as lashing out at Derek felt, I knew I'd have to be patient and judicious. The path ahead would require deft precision. One false move and Mason's safety would be jeopardized. My grandson's life hung in the balance, and I'd be damned if I allowed that snake Derek to slither his way out of this. It was time to enlist some professional assistance from a friend who'd spent his life hunting reprobates like Derek. Phase 2 required calling in the big guns, starting with hitting up my old pal Raymond. Raymond's brow furrowed as he pored over the paper trail I'd compiled on Derek. Bank statements, phone records, even a sordid photo from the strip club where he'd been caught cheating months ago. "This is one twisted character you're dealing with," he muttered, shoving the stack aside with a disgusted huff. "But it's a good start." I bristled at his nonchalance. "A start? Ray, that praved con man plotted to kill my Jenna." Raymond's eyes softened as he reached for my hand. "I know, Elle, and we'll nail that bastard's hide to the wall. But we've got to be meticulous, build an airtight case piece by damning piece." Grinding my teeth, I gave a reluctant nod. As a retired police captain, Raymond knew how to play this sadistic game. As much as I craved to barge in, fist-swinging, cooler heads had to prevail, especially for Mason's sake. That poor kid had been fed lie after lie by his father, thinking his beloved mother simply took off. The thought of him trapped in Derek's clutches made my skin crawl. Over the next several days, Raymond and I built a coordinate strike, burning the midnight oil over whiskey and case files. He leveraged his old officer contacts to unearth the sordid details: Derek's bookies, his side chicks, and most damning of all, the inflated life insurance premium he'd started paying weeks before Jenna's vanishing. "There's our motive," Raymond said, tapping the document. He quite literally took out a policy on her life before attempting to, well... A lump formed in my throat as I considered the depths of Derek's depravity. What's more, as a teacher with modest earnings, Jenna had been blindsided by the massive payout. No wonder Derek was living so large. With every clue, the picture became clearer. He'd been setting the stage to cash in, all while keeping my beloved girl-in-law clueless to his sinister plot. The dizzying realization made me queasy. Just as I steadied my breath, Raymond slid another photo across the table. Derek stumbling from a sleazy motel room, lips smeared in tawdry lipstick, his sly grin stretching ear to ear. "This was taken 3 days after Jenna went missing," Raymond said grimly. "Care to guess who our friend in the cowboy hat is?" I squinted at the petite blonde emerging behind Derek, her face partially obscured but still achingly familiar. Tara, Jenna's friend. The same young woman who had just promised to help us bring her down. The deception left me seething as my fists clenched. I should have known that snake couldn't be trusted. But then it hit me. What if this was merely another strategic deception, one that could play perfectly into our trap? A slow smile spread across my lips. "Oh, she's going to help us all right," I purred, snatching up the incriminating photo. "More than she'll ever know." Raymond cocked an eyebrow but said nothing, wise enough to let me take the reins. He simply refilled his glass as I outlined my master plan, one that would leverage every last player on the chessboard to protect Mason and bury Derek once and for all. Revenge, like justice, would be best served piping hot. The family dinner was a dry run for my grand inquisition of Derek. Raymond and I had meticulously assembled every document, every photo, an overwhelming case to dismantle his lies once and for all. Yet a bigger challenge loomed: Mason. His allegiance was still divided between his beloved late mother and his manipulative, very much alive father. I had to tread carefully, protecting him from the full, sordid truth, until Derek's defenses were shattered. Mason eyed me cautiously from across the table as I laid out the bread and salad. Derek, ever the arrogant fool, filled his wineglass to the brim, oblivious to the reckoning on the horizon. "You've seemed awfully preoccupied lately, Elaine," he said with a smirk. "Everything okay over there in Vinegar Villa?" I bristled but maintained my poise. "Everything is fine, Derek. I've just been catching up on some reading." His brow arched in mock concern. "Oh, do tell. Maybe I can recommend a nice work of fiction to lift your spirits." The venom in his voice was palpable. This smug bastard had no shame, did he? No matter, I'd wipe that Cheshire grin off his face soon enough. Suppressing a twisted smile, I retrieved the thick manila folder tucked under my seat. "Actually, I've been studying up on much more riveting literature. The kind with pictures." With a flat thump, I slapped the folder on the table, its contents spilling free: crime scene photos, bank statements, Inizined motel stills. Raymond remained stoic, but Derek's complexion drained of color. "The hell is this?" he sputtered. "The truth," I said evenly. I turned to Mason. "Something your father seems allergic to." Mason's eyes darted between Derek and me. Horrified confusion splashed across his face. "Dad, what—" "Don't listen to her, son," Derek spat, sweat beading his brow. "Your grandma's had too much goddamn Pinot and—" "I've had enough," I roared, slamming my fists on the table. "Enough of your lies, your philandering, your vile disrespect for Jenna and this whole family." Wine sloshed from overturned glasses as Derek shot to his feet. "How dare you, you conniving old bat! You've gone and lost your damn mind." Raymond rose like a monolith beside me, his baritone voice cutting through the commotion. "Can it, dirtbag? The hashers are all here, therapists, clergy, everyone who gave a damn about Jenna. We've got enough to put you away for—" I tuned out the legal jargon, focusing on Mason. Shock and horror contorted his boyish features as the weight of the truth crashed over him in waves. My heart ached to shield him from this pain, this ultimate betrayal. Tears streamed down his face as he turned to Derek. "Dad, what did you do?" Derek's face reddened. For an instant, I pitied the boy still clinging to his father's imaged nobility. Then reality struck in the form of Derek's chilling backhand. "You'll do as I say, you disrespectful little—" I moved on instinct, my elbow catching his ribs with a sickening crack before Raymond hauled him back. The beast's true colors raged to the fore, mercilessly unleashed on his only child. As Mason crumpled to the floor, I rushed to his side, pulling him close. He sobbed into my chest, so fragile, yet still clinging to hope. Hope that for once, truth would finally prevail over lies, and I would ensure it did, no matter how much carnage the gathering storm would leave in its wake. The aftermath of Derek's public meltdown was a blur. Mason refused to speak to or even look at his father, staying glued to my side like a terrified child. I didn't blame him. That ruthless slap had finally shattered the illusion of Derek's hollow paternal facade. As for Derek himself, he ricocheted between blustering threats and sniveling pleas as Raymond's cop buddies hauled him away on suspicion of domestic violence. Of course, it was merely the tip of the iceberg, but an important first step to strip away his freedom and his cockiness. "I want that smug prick to feel the walls closing in from every angle," Raymond assured me later that evening over straight whiskeys. We'd reassembled at his place to regroup, poring over the meticulously assembled case files and devising our multi-pronged attack strategy. With Derek safely tucked away, we could accelerate our efforts without him slithering free. "First order of business is protecting Mason," I said, jaw clenched. "He's not going anywhere near that snake again until the venom's been completely extracted." Raymond nodded grimly. "Agreed. We'll get emergency custody pushed through so he's fully in your care. Judges will side with us, especially after that sick display." "Good." I drained my glass, relishing the slow burn at the back of my throat. "Because the bastard crossed the final line when he struck that boy. Everything from here on out is scorched earth." For the next several hours, we assembled our chess pieces. Anonymous tips firing off to the police about Derek's illicit gambling, shady business dealings, and possible crimes against Jenna. A meticulous forensic audit to freeze every last penny of his assets, smokescreen transactions designed to panic him into revealing his hand. Finally, we formed the centerpiece, a meticulously planned sting operation to catch Derek red-handed in the midst of his next infidelity. This one to be captured on video and splashed across every social media feed in town. I grinned wolfishly as Raymond outlined the tech specs: special lenses and ultra-encrypted streaming links primed to broadcast Derek's lies and lechery to a hand-picked audience of influential friends, employers, anyone who could maximize his public flaming. He'll be so disgraced, so hamstrung by looming charges, that rolling over and confessing everything will be his only chance to try saving face. Raymond purred, clearly relishing the intricacies of our ornate takedown. I simply nodded, adrenaline thrumming through my veins as visions of Derek's unraveling danced before me. He deserved far worse than a fractured reputation or quelched finances. Budding Mason, my poor, innocent grandson, that unforgivable sin warranted the harshest karmic vengeance this life could serve, and I would be its sword of deliverance. Draining the last amber dregs from my glass, I turned to Raymond with a feral gleam. Let's make that bastard bleed. The sting was going off without a hitch. Tara had lured Derek to the seedy downtown motel with practiced precision, her coquettish texts and promises of fun speaking directly to his baser impulses. From my discreet staging point down the hall, I could hear the telltale sounds of Derek's arrival, his arrogant bravado greeting Tara, that familiar slithery tone that made my skin crawl. Well, hello there, gorgeous. You're looking even tastier than those pictures you sent. Tara's flirtatious girlish giggle was practically theatrical. You always were the charmer, Mr. Sullivan. Now why don't you come on inside and let me take care of you? I had to commend her committed performance, especially knowing that less than 48 hours earlier, I'd strong-armed her into cooperating by showing the proof of her previous trysts with Derek. The fear in those big doe eyes told me all I needed to know. As Derek's oily chuckle faded behind the closed door, Raymond emerged from the shadows, holding up a tiny microchip between his fingers. Cameras are hot and transmitting to our secure channel. Time to go live. We slipped on our headsets and tapped into the feed just as Derek was peeling off Tara's satiny robe, his meaty paws groping her lithe frame with shameless entitlement. God, I've missed this body. The lewd image was merely prelude for the fireworks to come. I thought of Mason, still recovering from his own traumatic disillusionment, and my righteous resolve strengthened. Expose this charlatan for the abusive, self-serving creep he was. That was the only path to justice. On Raymond's mark, our crew activated a precise digital operation, one that broadcasted the live stream to very specific trusted contacts, church leaders, Derek's employers, charity figureheads, upstanding people mortified to see one of their own engaged in such debased improprieties. Pandemonium erupted as our network expanded exponentially across the small town, the shock and horror reverberating through the entire community. The calls and messages deluged my phone in a barrage of disgust and repudiation, and through it all, Derek remained oblivious to his unraveling, rutting away on that tawdry motel room bed, at least until Raymond's gruff voice broke through the speakers. Having fun there, dirtbag. Derek froze, his bulging face snapping up in wild-eyed panic. What is this? A reckoning, Raymond replied coolly. One that's coming at you from all sides, thanks to that cute little video feed you're starring in. At that moment, Derek's phone began ringing off the hook, every busybody and professional contact bearing witness to his brazen indiscretions. His frantic howls and fumbled attempts to kill the stream were utterly fruitless. The depraved spectacle was live for the world to see. Somewhere in that pathetic display of panic and shame, I was dimly aware of Tara gathering her clothes and darting from the room. Her part in our charade was over. Mine, however, was just beginning. Time for the snake's final constriction. Straightening my spine, I strode down the hallway with purpose. The door opened before I could even knock. There stood Derek, his sweaty, horrified face almost subhuman at this point. I locked eyes with the wretched creature, letting the waves of reviled anger wash over me. "Hello, Derek," I said coldly. "We need to talk." Derek's world was crumbling. I could see it in his wild, desperate eyes as he stared back at me in the dingy motel room, utterly shell-shocked. This has to be some kind of mistake," he stammered, struggling to cover his nakedness. "You can't seriously think I'd—" "Save it," I snapped, his pathetic excuses like sandpaper against my resolve. "The jig is up, Derek. We have everything, the affairs, the gambling, the insurance scam you tried to run on Jenna. It's all been exposed." He recoiled as if struck, his bravado finally deflating under the weight of his sins laid bare. Raymond emerged from the hallway, arms crossed like a sentry guarding an inmate. 2 uniformed officers flanked him, eyes scanning Derek with undisguised repulsion. "We've got enough to put you away for a long time, Sullivan," Raymond growled. "But even prison will be a cakewalk compared to the beatdown your reputation's about to take." As if on cue, Derek's phone erupted again, a cacophony of shrill rings and pinging text notifications. The shock, the scorn of his community discovering his web of depravity in such dramatic fashion. I watched as he picked it up with a shaking hand, scrolling through the onslaught of vitriol numbly. This can't be real," he whispered, complexion blanching. "I'm ruined." Not yet you aren't, I said with chilling finality. But you can start making amends right now by telling us the truth about Jenna. Derek's roomy gaze flicked up to bore into mine, twin vortices of panic and hatred swirling in their depths. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of the darkness that must have consumed my sweet Jenna's final days, the insidious dread she felt around this man she'd once loved. My stomach turned, but I held my steely glare. What did you do? For a span of harrowing seconds, Derek was utterly mute, the whirlwind of his sins rendering him catatonic. Just when I began to lose hope, his thin lips parted once more. I just wanted out, he croaked, voice barely audible. The debts, the money problems. I thought if I could just make her disappear, that big insurance payout would solve it all. The words hung heavy in the fetid air, a damning admission of his greed and monstrosity. Raymond tensed beside me, but I raised a hand to stay him. I needed to hear the unvarnished truth. But Jenna, she must have suspected something, Derek continued, his voice dropping to a guttural rasp. I started clearing out the accounts, keeping her in the dark, anything to keep the payout intact after I took care of her. But she caught wind and bailed. Took off with nothing but a damn ringful of cash from her jewelry box. My heart clenched as hatred bubbled through me like acidic bile. This whole sordid nightmare, every agonizing uncertainty Jenna must have endured in those final weeks, all because her husband craved an easier life. I wanted to unleash a scream, a torrent of sadistic punches, anything to absolve this rage. But I stayed my hand, letting the icy silence eviscerate Derek's soul. Because in this moment, I realized my revenge was complete. He was already in hell, forged of the very lies and betrayal he'd callously inflicted on everyone around him. The stain of his sins would never wash off. So as the police closed in, wrenching his arms behind his back, I simply watched in hollow triumph. No satisfaction, no feeling of release. The monster's secret was out, his freedom forfeit. But at what cost had this justice come? The question haunted me, as Derek was hauled away in disgrace. At last, the search for Jenna could begin in earnest. I only prayed that this nightmare's ending would allow for a shred of healing to take root. The call came just after midnight, Raymond's gruff voice crackling through the line with a mixture of elation and sheer disbelief. "We found her, Elaine. Jenna's alive." My legs buckled as the words washed over me, equal parts rapture and terror paralyzing my every nerve. After weeks of feverish searching, haunted by visions of her scared face from that hidden attic journal, she was out there somewhere, safe. Raymond relayed the details. An anonymous tip from a diner waitress in Santa Fe who recognized Jenna's photo from the news broadcasts. Apparently she'd been serving there under an assumed name, laying low as a refugee from her own life. Relief and rage churned through me in sickening waves. While Derek rotted in jail awaiting trial, my poor girl had spent months as a fractured ghost, severed from her loved ones by the man who vowed to honor and protect her. But she was safe. That mantra alone propelled my shaking feet into action, every maternal instinct roaring to reunite with my unsung warrior. The airport's fluorescent lights stung my weary eyes, but I blinked past their glare, scanning every haggard face passing through customs. At last a familiar figure emerged, chocolate ringlets framing her hollow cheeks, her slender frame seeming to hunch under an immense invisible weight. "Mom?" she whispered, tentative and childlike. That was all it took to release the torrent. With a strangled cry, I gathered Jenna into my arms, clinging to her fragile bird bones as the dam burst. We sank to our knees in a tangle of sobs, fear and regret, and blessed relief whirling around us in a maelstrom. "You're safe," I gasped between heaving breaths. "Oh God, you're safe." For long moments, we were lost in our raw reunion, willfully blind to the churning current of life swirling around us. When at last Jenna leaned back, her eyes were glassy yet shining with a rekindled spark. "How?" she stammered, the word more rugged gasp than true question. I stroked her matted curls, grimacing at how frail and hounded she looked. No mother should ever have to see their child in such pain. "It's over," I said firmly, steadying my voice. Derek confessed everything. With help from Raymond and some other supporters, he was exposed and arrested for what he did. All the debts, affairs, everything. It's finished. A tremulous sigh escaped her, somewhere between anguish and blissful release. "So he'll never hurt me again?" "Never," I said, pulling her close, and I'll make damn sure that snake never gets within a mile of my family ever again. Jenna stiffened at that, pulling back with a panicked look. Oh God, Mason, is he? Hey now, it's all right. I raised a soothing hand, unwinding the knot of fear in her gut. Mason's safe and sound, sweetie. He's with me for now, tucked away from all the ugliness. As soon as you're ready, we'll be a family again. Her hand trembled as it found mine, squeezing with the first embers of a familiar strength flickering back to life in those lost hazel eyes. I don't know how I'll ever thank you for not giving up on me. I gave her a reassuring look as my own tears flowed freely. Sometimes revenge is what gets you through the night, baby girl. But for a mother's love? I pressed my forehead to hers, savoring our reunion as a brilliant new dawn broke on the horizon. That burning light will always lead me home.